In the apartment, Kathleen was surprisingly quiet. She already used to that they rarely drop in guests. Mother didn't go out at all, and all because of a hateful disease. Half a year later, she was given a bad diagnosis. Doctor said that now you have to lead a home lifestyle. But Kathleen did not lose heart. She knew that the day will come, when will they be again, as before, walk on the street. While she did everything, not only to brighten up the seclusion of the mother, but also to earn money for medicines. One day a Brenda woman approached her on the street and offered to tell fortunes. Listening, woman, reach out a pen, I will tell you the whole truth. But Kathleen didn't really believe in witchcraft, and Brenda didn't look like a fortune teller. As she fell behind, the woman held out her hand and said, Look, maybe there is something about my mother. Brenda began to run her fingers along the inside of the palm, whispering something along the way, like reading a prayer. Kathleen couldn't understand what this stranger said, but believed what the future would now know. Finally, Brenda stopped whispering, looked at Kathleen and said, I see that your mother is very ill, and you want to cure her. Woman nodded her head, agreeing with her arguments. You're right, but I'm interested in that. How can you help? Brenda again turned her gaze to the palm, then raised her head to the sky and said, Yes, you will know that a stranger will meet on your way, here he will help. Brenda didn't say anything, turned around and walked in the opposite direction. Here Kathleen understood, that did not thank the seer, however, that one has already caught a trace. So a woman with banknotes in her hands stood in the middle of the street for a long time. From stupor Andy brought out by a passerby man, who thought, what is wrong with her? Thanking him for participating, the woman went to the house. In the apartment was still the same silence, only on the day of her old refrigerator was a little distraction from loneliness. In room where Mom was, there was a TV, but she rarely turned it on, so he had time covered with dust. Coming up to Mother's bed, Kathleen ran her hand through her hair, not experienced, good, everything will be fine soon. Mother looked closely at her daughter and asked, You, maybe, went to that doctor again. Only in vain, he won't help, and if it helps, then there will be nothing to do for free. This woman was right. They don't have that money now, what is needed for treatment, and also salaries. What does Kathleen get? Barely enough to eat. Gone a couple of minutes before Kathleen remembered what I wanted to tell my mother about Brenda. After looking at her sad face, she decided that now such news would be welcome. You do not rush to scold me, but today a Brenda woman thought and said to me, that some stranger will help you. Mother is even more upset by these words. All it's in vain. I never trusted gypsies, they try to cheat, especially if the person is naive. More thinking over your thoughts, and the daughter continued the conversation. To me seems that there is truth in the fortune-telling of a Brenda. Well, it's not clear who this stranger is. It seemed that both women grasped at empty straws. I'm like the air now needs any chance for healing. Kathleen couldn't accept it, that Mom will remain bedridden. She hoped to find that stranger. Listen, maybe I should look more closely at those people, what is in the immediate environment. The sick mother could not grasp the meaning of her daughter's proposal. About who are you talking toys and who needs us now if really look at things, then almost everyone turned away from us, and that was also true. For the last few months no one has come to your house, therefore, there was no point in relying on the help of relatives. The only comfort for them was an elderly neighbor, who occasionally visited. Here her mother sent for her Kathleen before asking to put the kettle on. By half an hour a woman came to the kitchen and began to host. Overcoming joint pain, she set the table and poured strong tea into a cup. Kathleen returned accompanied by a neighbor, and walked up to the woman and hugged her. You, what is it, limp? Like a memorial, be more fun, otherwise, looking at you, I want to cry too. They sat down at the table and began to drink tea. Mother Kathleen looked at my neighbor and then at the daughter. You know, what did she tell me now? In short, Brenda predicted healing. Silence has come. Neighbor clearly thought about what she heard. By a minute she moved closer to the woman and said, you think that I doubt the words of a Brenda and nothing similar. To me she once helped. This was a long time ago, so I forgot. Kathleen felt some relief. Now Mom won't count her. Naive. Daughter, she sat down at the table and poured herself some tea. I also think that Brenda is right. At least, she accurately named the diagnosis and age of the mother. Neighbor turned her face to her and smiled. All right, these people are very well versed in human souls. One mother did not understand why this conversation, but I wanted to take part in it. You so animatedly discussed my fate, but did not deign to ask, what? As a matter of fact, I want women stop the conversation and pay attention to her. The hostess is really waiting at home, when she gets to speak. Kathleen stretched out her hands and put them on the table, making it clear that now listens to her completely. He speaks, Mother? Now interesting, what is your plan? A dove suddenly appeared in the window. He pounds hard on the glass, as if asking for a visit. Her mother could not stand it, and said, Here is what I wanted to say. We will receive a letter, and she will change our lives. Almost choked with surprise. Really, and Mom could now foresee fate to not languishing yourself with unknown facts. Kathleen decided with views about the letter. What can I write there? A mysterious message from a stranger. After all, Brenda was talking about him. Mother looked at her daughter with displeasure and pretended that missed the unpleasant irony. Only the neighbor was unaware, preferring not to get into someone else's conversation. After finishing the tea, she said goodbye to the owners and left. Kathleen closed the door behind her and went back to the kitchen. Mother, I had already washed the dishes and now I was standing near the open window. Coming up closer, daughter saw, as she strokes the dove and sentences, Mother, you, messenger of fate, though would hint, what awaits me. Kathleen snuggled up to her mother and began to calm her down. But believe, if someone wanted to write to us, they would have done it a long time ago. But the woman did not let up. I know that a letter will come that will change our whole life. With these words, Mother went into the room. There she still turned on the TV and sat down in a chair. The daughter was glad that finally there was a revival in the house. In the evening she went to her friend to talk about Brenda, and couldn't wait to share my thoughts. Former classmate has long been waiting for her to visit. Since then, how did they learn, and haven't had a chance to meet yet. Having passed the apartment, Thomas started her conversation, and quote, Don't tell me that I'm superstitious. Earlier bypasses and now they are my only consolation. Girlfriend brought some newspaper into the living room and began to point to the pictures. Look, I bought it this morning. Here is an article about it, how one Brenda helped cure a child. Kathleen looked at the title of the post and wondered too. She looked at what was written there, and a classmate brought 2 glasses of juice. Now it was clear that Brenda was telling the truth. Well, who is that stranger, remains a mystery. Here Kathleen remembered how a dove flew into the kitchen window. At first I did not attach any importance to this, but my mother said that soon we will receive an interesting message. To me seems that a series of changes begins in our life. The words sounded like a sentence, like Kathleen already knew what to prepare for. Having returned to a friend, she began to say absurd things. Maybe divination will help in the treatment of the mother, but it's all sorcery, and I used to believe in tangible things. So the woman soothed her disbelief. Outsiders people at some point thought, what is there to see the future in front of you? This letter that Mom was talking about is unambiguously related to relatives. She spent an hour with a friend, and then said goodbye and left. Nothing new today, but it was possible to hope for the fulfillment of desire. Mother met my daughter right on the doorstep. And she was holding an envelope in her hands. Here, you didn't believe me. While you were gone, the postman came. He knocked on the door and gave the letter. On the white envelope was the address of the notary's office, just not local, but from another city. Decided to print it out and find out what information is hidden there. Trembling from the excitement of the hands, Kathleen opened the envelope. And there was a sheet of paper, folded in half. Mother couldn't resist and said, Well, don't torment me, read what is written there. Daughter turned closer to the light bulb and began to pronounce what was written. To you going to the notary, to accept an inheritance. Women couldn't believe their ears. Somebody bequeathed to them a house in the village. Hear just why and who needs it from they recognize the letters, that the great aunt left this world and left behind a small house. By law they had to accept the inheritance or refuse. But they already knew that Mom completely agrees with her and they will move to the village. Mother began to dream of fresh air. Here, get out into nature, then the disease will not be a hindrance. I decided to go to the notary the next day. All night Kathleen remembered what kind of aunt could act so generously with them. Ironhead was one porridge, meeting with Brenda, newspaper article, and this dove on the window. In the morning they went to the office and, despite more, Mom is on her way too, just asked, so that the daughter takes a wand with her. When they came out of the door, they were already waiting. About taxi in half an hour that we were driving, the women didn't say a word, and the driver, noticing genuine silence, also immersed in my thoughts. In at the notary's office they were met by the secretary and immediately went to the office. Kathleen and her mother sat down at the chairs and began to listen. What does the notary say? You need to sign several documents, and you can go to that house. I don't worry about legacy, we found no other contenders exist. Mother Kathleen carefully read all papers, and then signed. Now she is the rightful heiress of the village house. But for some reason she felt sad. You know, this move scares me. What will happen to the apartment? On who will we leave her? There, I decided to comfort my mother. Nothing, the grid will look after our housing, but the country air will only benefit you. Secretary accompanied the women to the exit and wished them good luck. At home they re-examined all the documents, so that there are no misunderstandings. First, I decided to break the silence there. If the house is actually inhabited, so why don't we move into it? Mother listened to the daughter, as if spellbound. You speak right, that in the village I will be better. City suffocates with loneliness. Noticeable revival pleased Kathleen, and she thought that some Brenda predictions would come true. Remaining wait, when a mysterious stranger appears in their lives. By a couple of days they had already collected things, and about the apartment decided, let the neighbor look after them. Kathleen gave her spare keys. I know that you have done so much good for us, but won't you agree to come to the apartment sometimes? Neighbor looked at Kathleen and asked a question. Tell, you believe this Brenda and take your mother to the village. To cure woman didn't know how to answer, so I just nodded my head. Back home, Thomas told mother that no, their apartments are safe. On the same day the car transported them to the village. I had to hire movers, so that they'd bring everything into the house and carefully unpack. Kathleen internally rejoiced. They inherited comfortable housing. Here nothing needs to be repaired, just move in and live. Mom didn't have any problems either. It surprisingly made it to the entrance on its own. Inside everything breathed country life, even some of the old furniture has been preserved. Is it true, there were more modern changes? Instead of a stove, a gas boiler, and the water is not from the well, but along the well. What were they waiting for? So this is civilization. Those who lived here, we see, tried to decorate the house. All the things were placed in 2 rooms, and a large table was placed in the living room. From the kitchen window could see the river, and Kathleen pointed to her hand. You see, what a beauty will swim, sunbathe at the same time. Mother, sunbathing is very beneficial. Rustic. The view was really calming and suggestive of pleasant thoughts. Mother looked at the river and said, once upon a time I went there, to be with my father, your grandfather, to catch fish. Car already left with the movers, and the women decided to cook dinner. But before they had time to get kitchen utensils, as the gate knocked on the door. A stranger stood in the street, but by his appearance it was not difficult to guess that he is one of the local residents. Man was not tall and reached the viewing slot in the gates. I had Kathleen opening, to get acquainted, and at the same time find out the purpose of the visit. Hello, I don't know who you are, but since they came, then come to our house. Stranger thanked for the invitation, and with a leisurely step went to the veranda. Mother already got out, and it met him. Is it true, she did not know how to deal with him? Unfamiliar, the man himself decided to start an acquaintance. My name is Scott, I am your neighbor. I decided to take a look, who came to our village. At home understood that you should invite him to the table. We were going to have dinner. Maybe, joined. Scott shook her head affirmatively, but added, eat I don't feel like, alone from the table, but I'll drink tea for acquaintance. By Kathleen fussed around the table. Her mother has already found a common language with him. The changes, Scott, and you have been living here for a long time. Man looked at Mom with surprised eyes. Not that I want to offend you, but we are almost the same age, so just call me by my first name. I am during tea drinking. She told about her family and about how hard they've been living lately. Scott listened and continued to drink tea. He was analyzing what they wanted to convey. Kathleen pushed a plate of cookies towards him. Help yourself. That one water, say later, that they invited me to empty tea. Now Scott laughed. Yes, that you are here and tell them to no one. All left for the city, few pensioners left, and they stay at home, and don't want to go outside again. Mother Kathleen invited him to tell a little about the village. Man began to tell that the history of the village is deeply rooted in the past. Scott even boasted that his family is directly related to the old family of merchants. Now he was left alone, but got a rich estate. Neighbor looked at the woman and said, for rent to me, that your health leaves much to be desired. Kathleen pricked up, trying to understand what he was talking about now, but Scott continued, more as a child, my grandmother taught me all kinds of healing. Though boring science, it saved me a few times. I am this moment at. The woman moved her hands to him and asked him to tell fortunes. Maybe, you read fate along the lines, what future awaits me, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Scott didn't say anything. He took my mother's hands in his palms and began to look at the ceiling. So it lasted several minutes. After the man opened his hands and said, feel, what do cats scratch in your soul? After all, you don't bake for yourself anymore, and daughters are worried. Woman lowered her head and answered, all I wanted was life, so that my Kathleen became a self-reliant and independent woman. Further, she told Soil about that she only hung on her daughter the burden of responsibility for her fate. Kathleen, it became awkward that at such a moment one has to touch on sensitive topics. She decided to take the conversation in a different direction. To what are we all about? Diseases? I maybe show us the village. Men willingly agreed to give the women a tour of the local beauties, and the first point of their visit was an abandoned mill. Here Scott stopped and thought. For a long time he looked at the great outlet of the publication and did not say anything. Thomas decided to ask, why are you staring at the mill so intently? Scott, as if back to reality. You see, Kathleen, this is my family history. Once upon a time here the ancestors grinded flour, and then took it to the market, to get money for it. It was interesting to listen, as a man animatedly talked about the family tree. Mother turned to him and said, I know this mill. I was also told this before I was born. There we lived with our grandmother. Here she told about it, how she worked at this very mill. You do not remember? Then the grandmother did not accidentally limp. Woman rolled her eyes and spoke. All right, grandmother came to us by accident. My mom adopted her. She only stayed with us for a short time. By several months gone. Here it turned out that it was Bread's grandmother, who had a fight with her grandfather and left home. How was it good? What's like this? On some person they agreed. In conversations Kathleen suggested going further, but Scott raised a leaflet and showed my mother, I'm good at herbs, so I can help you with your pain. Women looked at each other and understood, what exactly did Brenda say about him? In the last few days Scott came to visit them more and more often. He brought supplies from the garden. Kathleen, although she refused to take them, she had to give in to the pressure of a caring neighbor. Mother has been waiting all this time. When the long-awaited moment arrives, she no longer has to think about her illness. The neighbor was always busy, then he sawed firewood on his site, was absent altogether, disappeared even for a few days, and Kathleen thought that he left the village. When she passed by his gate, I noticed something was not closed. A woman overcame interest, and she walked into the yard. No, the dog was out of the question, the booth was simply missing. However, this was not what attracted Kathleen. She guessed, as the house soil was unclosed. She didn't stay there, and her mother told her that what can't be entered, still housing. Woman couldn't resist. Rising up the stairs, she tried not to break the silence. It seemed that the neighbor was somewhere nearby and now just followed her. But there was no one, and Thomas entered the house. Circumstance housing resembled a bachelor's attire, only a minimum of furniture and utensils. What concerns the blessings of civilization, the TV was still present. Further, she looked at the pictures that hung on the wall, and in one of them Kathleen saw a familiar face, just couldn't understand where she saw him. One picture of a woman holding a small child, guessed the hand of the master, who took the photo. For this occupation caught Scott. I see, you enjoyed exploring my house. Kathleen, I almost dropped the picture from my hands. Sorry, but you were away for a long time. I decided to check, is everything okay? After she told the neighbor that his gate and house were open, she thought that the house was robbed. Scott took the photograph from her hands and hung it back on the wall. All right, I was gone for a long time, I just needed something to cook. For the time that I lived here, I was already used to being away from civilization. Yes, and why do I need all this, if nature gives what no one has in life? Wherein Scott threw up his hands, as if showing what gave him a local village. Then he got up and walked around the room. Then stopped by Kathleen and looked into her face. And the photo, which you just saw, is related to your mother. Woman couldn't understand what the neighbor was up to, so I decided to dry it out. Scott went to the kitchen and poured himself water from a bucket. Here he looked out the window and said, when Grandma quarreled with Grandpa, I was young and didn't know what happened. Only years later I found out that she migrated to the city, away from family, and Kathleen wanted to ask something, but the man was ahead of her. To me it took a lot of effort to find Grandma, but she was in your family. That's why, realizing that she shouldn't be bothered, I decided to think. Further, the man told that for several years they followed their family. He waited, when the opportunity presented itself, to get acquainted. Scott found out quite recently, and specially sent Brenda. This what, their aunt's house will remain same was aware. Why didn't you come earlier? So that's why, what was afraid. Misunderstanding, Kathleen decided to calm him down. You don't think that my mother is somehow biased towards you to her need time to get used to a new person. You, if I understood correctly, wish our family only the best. Scott nodded his head in agreement. You sheltered grandmother and helped her cope with difficulties. More, how long did they sit in the house soil and tried to understand, what should they do now? One sighed, everything was resolved, and do not hide the fact of intentional acquaintance. But Kathleen, I decided to let my mom know. Let her know who's saved from death. Maybe not everything is in her power, and only the parents were involved. Here this acquaintance is only more valuable. Passing past the gate, Scott took a small bundle. Or rather, it was a canvas bag, but what was there, I could only guess. Realizing what Kathleen tormented by conjectures, the neighbor decided to lift the veil of secrecy. I don't worry, there's nothing wrong with this bag. Only that, what will really help your mother? Here to Kathleen has come. Scott prepared some medicine, and while walking to their house smelled the strange smell. One mom was sitting on the porch and playing with the kitten. He was taken from the city, so that he was the first to cross the threshold of the apartment. After looking on daughter, she said, You see, how he loves my hands. This means that it feels good. How else? Scott looked at the woman and took out an amulet from the bag. Turns out that he kept an ordinary stone there all this time. Thomas was interested and asked, How will your gift help my mom? Already tried so many things, what faith gone? Mother also looked at the neighbor and said, To me I want to be needed, they are just a burden. You look, why did I bring my daughter? It was hard to understand, what does Scott want? But he handed the amulet to the woman and put it on her neck. From the sun lit up the stone as if with multicolored lights. At home first seen, to shine so bright. Maybe now you tell my mom the truth. The man also wanted to confess, but everyone was waiting for an opportunity. But now there was nothing to hide, and Scott confessed that I got to know their family a long time ago. Certainly, for them until the last day he remained in the shadows, and my mother listened and could not believe that good is returning. And it couldn't even cross my mind that the life of an old woman will restore health. The amulet really radiated positive energy. Here, so a trip out of town and a chance acquaintance helped a sick Mother Kathleen get rid of the disease. And Brenda, who guessed help from not dating, became a guiding thread for future recovery. In gratitude, women help soil housework, not to be bored. Village brings many people together, especially those who have the same fate and lifelines.